So I'm Gareth Waterhouse, a test solutions architect with Inspire Testing. Inspire Testing are passionate about testing, and we're going to do a series of videos with like-minded individuals to really understand what makes them tick and talk about topics that they care about. Today, to kick off this series, I'm very privileged to have the one and only Bas Dijkstra. Bas, thanks for joining me on this pilot today. In today's video, we're going to discuss the hot topic of unit tests and why we as testers should care about them. Firstly though, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Hi Garrett, thank you so much for having me. I'm a test automation trainer and consultant. I'm based and working out of the Netherlands. I've been in test automation for right about 14 years now. First, most a consultant, as a regular wage slave, as a regular employee for different consulting companies. And about 6 years ago, I started out on my own. And after a couple of years of being an independent contractor, I slowly shifted from doing just development to offering a wider variety of services. So now I mainly do training these days. But I still do a little bit of consulting. I do some writing. I do some public speaking every now and then. And I do software development too. So quite a range of activities now that I hear myself summarizing all of that.
Nice. I think like you said, I think it's important to kind of still do the consulting, still be involved in the testing and the development, just to stay relevant really. And otherwise you kind of, what we don't want is to have someone in an ivory tower talking down to people about how they should be doing things. And I think it's great. I think it's very important to kind of get your hands dirty, as you will, and kind of learn from the trade almost.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. That's why I would, while I love doing the training, and that has been the biggest part of my day-to-day work for the last couple of months, I would never just want to be a full-time trainer, because as you said, it's the risk or the danger of losing touch with what's actually happening inside the organization, inside the development teams that I work with, is just too high.
Yeah, that's great. I think I love how you've taken things that you're clearly like really passionate about in teaching, testing and development, and made a true career out of it. And I think if we can do the things we love as our job and as our career, we become better individuals and just more happy individuals as well. And you've clearly had a very long and successful career. What's been the most exciting thing you've done, or what are you most proud of, would you say?
Because I've been doing so many different things the last couple of years, and that is probably the thing that I've been most proud of as of late. Not necessarily individual achievements or things that I've done, but just being able to make this transition from doing consulting 40 hours a week to essentially building my own business, and more importantly, doing what I love to do and creating the ability for myself to do what I love and to be the only person responsible for filling my own agenda and positioning myself in a way that I'm able to do the things that I love and pick out the things that I want to work on. So that's a transition that I've been working on for the last, I'd say, 5 years or so, and especially in this last year, even in the interesting circumstances that we find ourselves in globally, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be able to just decide what I want to work on and still have fun. I'll have a lot of fun, but still also make a good living out of it.
Yeah, I think when you spoke at the beginning about you feel you don't have a long and distinguished career because you're still learning, you're constantly learning. I think that's an important trait of anyone really in terms of progressing and developing themselves, to kind of have that desire, that thirst for knowledge, and that desire to kind of improve yourself. I think that helps make your career as successful as it can be, really.
It is. I am definitely not in a position to just rest on my laurels and just keep doing what I do, because the entire IT field, especially also in software testing and test automation, it evolves so quickly. There are so many new and interesting things to learn, tools to learn, patterns to learn, emerging trends that we need to take into consideration. Uh, that's also what drew me to the IT field in the first place. It's an incredibly interesting field to work in, as you will uh, probably agree with.
Yeah, never is the Dunningkruger effect more apparent in that the more you learn about something, the more you realize you actually don't really know anything, or that there's so much more to learn about it.
Oh, absolutely. There's and the more you know, the more you know that you don't know. It's this, yeah, absolutely, absolutely agree. But that's what keeps it interesting.
Let's get on to the topic that we kind of going to be talking about, and that is unit tests and why we as testers should really care about them. I think, like anything, it's important to define what we mean when we say unit tests. I've worked in numerous places where unit tests mean one thing to one team and a completely different thing to another. I've worked in places where unit tests have been manual checks that people do. So Baz, first things first, how would you define a unit test?
It is incredibly hard to, as you said, to give one overall defining definition of what is a unit test. But when I typically talk about a unit test, I talk about a test that verifies the behavior of the smallest possible working piece of code, which is a class or maybe even a single method in a class. They don't require any, and so they don't cross any boundaries. It's just code, and it will not involve a database. It will not cross boundaries or layers of an application architecture. It will not send things over HTTP to a different component. If your test does that, it might still be a problem, but in my definition, it's not going to be a unit test. And they are code driven, which means that what I typically tell is that they don't require a built and deployed and a running application somewhere. It's all, these tests are all run against your application's source code. So, and they are written in code, but they also exercise your source code and not necessarily a deployed and running application somewhere. A few other typical characteristics of unit tests. That's not really part of the definition, but what I think with unit tests is that they are inexpensive to run, which means that they are fast. They're really fast. It's just a matter of a couple of milliseconds to use them, and they are also inexpensive to write. And this is something that most testers still, or not most testers, but a lot of testers still not fail to realize, but they might not be aware of this, that this whole unit testing thing, it sounds complex, scary, because code. But once you get over that initial hurdle or boundary of, oh gosh, now I have to write code to write my tests, you'll see that unit tests, because they are so small, they exercise just a very small portion of your application code. Unit tests itself, they are typically also, or they should be very small and fairly easy to write, in addition to being an expensive tool.
Cool. So yeah, I agree entirely. Unit tests obviously check the smallest piece of behavior. And I think I also know a lot of testers who don't want to get involved with unit testing, and it's seen very much as a developer's responsibility. And there's obviously many reasons for this, but what are some reasons that you feel that testers don't want to get involved in this?
Um, That's a good question. I've been wondering, and that's probably the reason why we're talking about this. I've been wondering I've been wondering about this more and more over the last couple of years, really. Because for a long time, for me as well, it was, and like I still hear a lot of testers say that's a developer's job. It's a developer's job to write the unit tests, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I do think that testers can contribute a whole lot to the activity of writing and maintaining and running unit tests. But I think that it's still scary, because instead of working with an application from an end user perspective, you now have to dive into the internals, into the implementation, into the internal structure of the application that you're testing. And for a lot of people, it's not as visible as, for example, a graphical user interface. And it makes it a little harder to understand what's happening, and how exactly a unit test drives a portion of the application code that you're actually testing there. And because unit tests themselves are also written in code, it involves reading a lot of code, but also writing it. And that's for so many testers, that's still not something they necessarily all too comfortable with.
Yeah, is that, would you put that down to skill set, arguably, or?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, because I think
definitely.
we're all, like I say, we're all aware that some testers don't know how to code, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And perhaps they don't even want to learn. But that doesn't make them less of a tester than someone who can code. But I can emphasize in that they may feel inferior to developers, or perhaps struggle to communicate with developers on a level footing, shall we say. Because a lot of developers, in my experience, have looked down on testers, especially those who aren't technical. And I use technical in inverted quotes, because I think that's a loaded term. What I mean when I say a technical tester may be very different to what you mean when you say technical tester, or anything like that. So I think I do understand that that's a loaded term. But what are some ways that you feel that people who don't know how to code can contribute and provide value with unit tests?
There are a couple of ways in which, even if you as a tester, you don't know how to code, and again, I fully agree with you that not having advanced software development or coding skills, it not necessarily has to, and makes you any less of a tester, because there are so many other ways in which we as testers can add value to a project. So I absolutely agree with that. So even if you're not necessarily comfortable with writing code, and there's still a couple of things that you can do as a tester to get more involved in this unit testing activity. It will require you to go and sit next, or sort of kind of next in these months, to a developer and talk with them and see what is it that you're. So what are you building? How are you testing that? Oh, I see you. I see you wrote. I hear you saying, and I see you writing unit tests. What do they do? Um, eh, because in the end, in the unit test, just like any other type of uh, test or piece of automation or whatever you want to call it, um, it verifies behavior. It just verifies behavior of your application on a somewhat lower level, but still, as it's with many units, they still um, they verify behavior that's important to someone. So, and we as testers, we know this, and the fact that it's expressed in code and that it directly exercises code doesn't mean that we as testers we don't have anything to say about this, or we're not allowed to have an opinion on it, or we're not allowed to give our input. And actually, a lot of the developers that I work with are or that I've worked with in the past. So I've seen a shift in the attitude of developers towards testing and testers as well. So you gave an example a little bit about that, developers seeing testers as inferior, especially when they're not so technical. I'm definitely seeing a change for the better in that over the last couple of years, partly because testers are slowly closing that gap between themselves and developers, but also because developers nowadays um, they um, much more than say 10 years ago they see the added value of testing and of writing tests themselves and of especially if it comes to automation, because they see how that makes their life easier as well. So they're definitely much I am more open to this collaboration and this communication than say 10 years ago or so. So and there's still this stigma about developers, oh, they don't do testing or so, but I don't find that to be true anymore, really. At least not with good developers, because the good developers do have to know about testing as well. So, and what I found is that they are definitely open to that conversation as well, to add to good suggestions about what their unit tests do and where they lack maybe, and what can, and I think that's a perfect opportunity for a tester to contribute, and because much more so than with other types of automation, because they are written so early in the process, unit tests. And especially if you follow a practice like TDD, you start with writing your unit tests. So why not invite yourself to a pair or mock or ensemble programming session and provide your input, and you don't necessarily have to understand how the developer actually implements it into the application code. But you can definitely contribute to saying, how can we test this? And are there any boundary values, any edge cases, any other paths through the code that we didn't think of yet? So, and that's all very valuable input from a tester's perspective, from people who are skilled at doing this, because that's what we're doing anyway as testers.
And I think it's like I say, it's important obviously to get the testers involved early, because I remember when I first started out, going back a few years now, um, I came in one morning and a developer said to me, I've pushed this into production. Can you test it? Make sure it works. And I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
well, kind of the wrong way of doing things. But I was young. I just did what he said and kind of moved on. But there's no way that would happen nowadays. Not just from my perspective. I think there's too many gates and too many, like, in terms of DevOps and things like that, that would kind of hopefully prevent that sort of thing from happening. Although I'm sure it happens to some degree in some places. But yeah, I mean, I think the relationship between developers and testers has changed for the better, I would say. And yeah, it's just important, obviously, to get testers involved early and not after you put things into production.
Absolutely, absolutely agree.
Cool. So we've covered people who don't know how to code, how they can contribute to unit tests and developers. But what about testers who can code, who are comfortable writing code and are pretty good at it? How can they get involved with unit tests? Do you think they should take sole responsibility? I mean, it does have testing in the title.
It does have testing in the title, but as I said, it's still it's often called still the job of a developer, because it is a testing activity, but then again, it's also a development activity. To be honest, I'm getting a bit fed up with this whole developer tester divide. If you are a tester who knows how to write code, then it makes it easier for you to contribute to writing unit tests because you know how to write it yourself, probably. Even though writing unit, the skill of being able to write unit tests is a little different from other types of automation because you need to know something, because you're programming against a different kind of API, against the classes and the methods that they expose of the source code of your system instead of against a graphical user interface or a REST API or through a database connection. So the skills required are a little bit, but knowing how to code will make this easier for you. But please don't fall into the trap of pulling out and making this your own responsibility as a tester, because that will just I create lazy developers again. And I don't think that's. I'm not saying that all developers are like this when they say, "Oh, somebody else is going to do the unit testing now, so I don't have to do it anymore." Okay, I'm not saying that, and that developers will do this. There will probably be some developers who think like that. But if you say, well, I know I'm a tester, but I know how to write code, so I'm going to do the unit testing. You're just creating another bottleneck in your team. So it's knowing how to code will make it easier for you to contribute, to fix, to detect any gaps in your unit test coverage and to fill those gaps with maybe some additional unit tests or fixing a failing unit test, for example, and it'll make it easier. It just means you can pick up some other tasks for the team a little easier. But it doesn't mean that it has to become your sole responsibility, because again, that's just creating bottlenecks and mini waterfalls in your development process. I don't think that's I don't think that's something that we should be aiming for.
No, definitely, I agree entirely. And it's important, like you say, we've covered like testers who can code, testers who can't code, how they want to and how they can contribute to unit tests. But I imagine that there are many developers who feel that it is their job. They don't want any outside help, especially from a tester. What are some ways that you feel that testers can build bridges with developers and help them understand the value that can be brought?
I think probably just by showing them what might happen if you don't write them. You say, well, if you don't write these unit tests, then we run the risk of disaster A or B happening. Or that means I have to verify this part of the behavior in a different kind of way, and that may be through some exploratory testing, as actual testing, or writing automation at a higher level, which is inherently slower and more expensive. And to talk to them and show them that the sooner we cover this through a decent set of unit tests, the sooner we will know that something is wrong, either when we're building the project or when we're changing something or adding something somewhere else, and we don't want any unintended side effects. So again, it is in the problems like these, they are always communication and people problems. They are not the technical problems. So talk to them, show them what happens if they don't do it. That's probably my best suggestion.
Because Gary Weinberger said every problem is a people problem.
Oh, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. So we've spoken quite a bit about testers working with developers. But what would you say is your experience of developers working with testers? Perhaps the obvious one is obviously on the some test automation at the UI level or APIs. But what about even exploratory testing sessions and the value that can bring?
Back to the communication, it helps bridge that gap between developers and testers. By showing them that having the and because it also helps developers to grow their testing skills. If you invite them to explore testing sessions or say, well, this is what I do, and this is how I come up with my test IDs. This is how my brain works. This is what I think of when you say, well, this piece of code is ready for testing. And that doesn't just start after they deliver that piece of code. Obviously, that starts hopefully way before that. And so, well, this is what I think of, and that helps if. Of course, that only helps if the developers actually interested in learning more about testing. I'm not really sure how to change that. It helps them learn more about what you do as a tester, because we hopefully that's a craft and a skill as well, and it's not just clicking buttons and seeing what happens. Hopefully, not good testing doesn't look like that really. And it helps them appreciate what you do and learn what you do, and hopefully they'll learn from it and see, and it helps them write better software and write better tests themselves as well. And I think the entire team benefits from that in the end, and your customer will benefit from it, because a developer with a quality mindset is an incredibly valuable asset to any team.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to think about the end customer in these situations, because we talk about unit testing, and you know what is faster, it's more efficient to run a unit test, but the end goal is obviously the customer, and the customer doesn't necessarily care about the unit tests. But
Oh no,
a great article of the unit test is that you're baking quality in to the application, and you're getting people thinking about that quality first mindset right from the get-go, and it will have a trickle down effect in that the end product will hopefully be a better product for the end customer.
There is no customer who has said, or at least I haven't found them yet, who said, here's a bag of money, now give me 500 unit tests. It is not about it. And obviously that goes for automation and in a broader sense for testing in general. The customer doesn't really care about how much testing has been done and how many tests were, and they are interested in the end product and what value that brings to them. And testing and by proxy automation makes it better. At least hopefully it does. Hopefully it does. It adds value in that way. But it's you should always think in terms of what does this mean for A, the quality of my product, and B, the perception that my customer, my user has about the product and about the quality of the product.
Yeah. And I think, like, going back to the original answer, you talk about testing as a craft. And I think it very much is that. It's a skilled craft, and development is a craft as well. But I think just by recognizing that it is a craft and then being passionate about it, both from a development perspective and from a testing perspective, the passion becomes infectious. So if I'm passionate about testing and working in a development team, that passion will rub off on the developers. And likewise, if developers are passionate about what they're doing, that will rub off on me, and we can just learn better together, like as a team, and hopefully just start building something as a team, not as testers and developers, but just really bringing everyone together and kind of like just working, singing from the same hymn sheet, shall we say? And I think if they see the testing we're doing, then they might even enjoy it and want to do more of it. And like I think one of the things that I found is that if testing is boring, then chances are you're doing it wrong. So you mentioned testing's not just clicking around, like it's,
No.
it's far more than that, you know. The chances are that if that is what you're doing and you're not enjoying it and it's boring, then you're doing it wrong. At least in my experience.
Yeah, but the same goes for development and any other activity,
Right.
really. If it's just if development was just copying and pasting code snippets from previous projects or from Stack Overflow, as I said, I'm a part-time software developer now as well. We try and stop thinking in terms of developers or testers, developers versus testers, but that it has been so much more than that, than just copying snippets from other projects or from Stack Overflow. It's an entirely different craft. And just like what you said with testing, if all you do as a tester is create test scripts, I think that's a dirty word now officially, using these test design techniques, which can still be incredibly valuable in some situations, but if all you do is apply test design techniques from documentation to generate test scripts, and then just put check marks next to them, definitely no, but as we all probably know by now, that's not what good testing is.
Okay. And Gareth, you commented there that you're working as a developer now, part-time, is it? So you're clearly very comfortable working, like flipping from a developer to a tester, back to a developer. And I think it goes back to what we said about obviously bridging that gap and bringing everyone together. But what are some things that you do personally that helps testers or developers kind of just develop themselves?
As I said in the introduction, part of what I do nowadays is providing training. And since I've been active in test automation for the last 14 years now, and what I've seen over the last year or so is that I'm not just doing this for testers anymore. I started out at training testers mostly in test automation. So what I and most of the time, what I'm teaching them is either to work with a specific tool or to learn them the basics of software development, of programming, with the end goal of being able to write automated tests. And that can be unit tests, integration tests, full stack tests, performance tests, any kind of test, really. So from one end, it's a lot of what I do is teaching testers how to write code. But I'm working more and more often also with developers who of course I don't need to teach them how to write code. They'll teach me how to improve my code that I use in courses, and I love that. And that's what I learn just as much as the participants from the training. It's just different things, but I get so much feedback on the examples and the code snippets that I use. It's brilliant. But what I teach them is, well, what does software testing look like? What is software testing, and what is this test automation thing? And just the fact that there's more than writing unit tests, and that's just a small part of the entire testing spectrum. And that's what I do more and more often nowadays as well. And working with developers and say, well, this is what testing looks like. And the thing that you've maybe been taught in a boot camp or a university, which that typically revolves around writing some unit tests, if software testing is even covered at all. But there's so much more, and I think the biggest compliment I got from one of the participants a couple of months ago, who was a developer, said, "Well, I thought this was going to be boring." So he was part of a boot camp or traineeship with he just recently started a new job, and he was in it. And initially, when he saw the training schedule for that there was 3 days of software testing and test automation, those are going to be the boring days. It turned out, well, there's so much more, and they got to write code. They wrote a lot of code, and they did different stuff, and and that's what I like to do as well. To just help developers be more aware of what testing is and what good testing looks like, and what also that there's more to testing than just automation. That still surprises some people from the development world. That there's this whole range of other activities that testers do. That testing is, as we said, it's much more than just putting putting check marks next to checks in test scripts and stuff like that. There's much more to testing, and some of the things that testers do can be supported by tools, which is not incidental what my definition of automation is. So yeah, long answer short, that's how I doing doing what I can, and arguably that's not too much because that's just me, but to slowly help bridge that gap between testers and developers by showing developers and training developers in what software testing is and what good software testing looks like and how automation plays a role in that, and by helping testers become more proficient automation engineers as well, because you can't deny that even if you, as a tester, you can still add a lot of value without doing automation. There's no, and that's not going to change. But I'm not saying that everybody should only do automation of it. So let's please not go down that road. But it is becoming an ever bigger part of what we do as testers, just because things are moving faster and faster, and we as in development teams, but also our customers want new software in ever shorter cycles. So we need ever faster feedback, and automation can be a big help in that. So it's for testers, that's what I help them understand what automation is, what it can and can't do, and see that it's something that it's not as scary as it looks to some people.
Cool. No, I think that sums it up. I think, obviously, testing is not just automation, but it's a key component that can help further any testing that you do.
It is, and that's basically how I start most of my courses. What is your definition of test automation? And people immediately either start talking about specific tools or about automation of regression test scripts, which is worthy of a discussion of its own, probably. But to me, as I said, it's just using tools to perform specific testing activities more efficiently.
Yeah. Cool.
So, and just with the end goal of getting because testing is all about gathering information, and tools, when used correctly, help me to uncover that information faster.
Yeah, definitely. Testing is all about, like I say, uncovering information and providing that to people who can make decisions based on information.
That's still something that's much better done by humans. Yeah, the actual communication part.
Cool, excellent. Well, thank you, Bas. We've kind of run out of time a little bit here, but I mean, just quickly, how can people find you and reach out to you if needed?
I am pretty active on LinkedIn, so if you type my name in LinkedIn, you're bound to find me, or via the contact form or email, and that's all listed on my website, which is ontestautomation.com.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bas. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for having me, Garrett.
No
It's been a
problem.
pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.